Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be working on the Horticulous Slimux, the Gardener of Nurgle. And so I've had this model for a long time. I got this model at the same time as my first Great Unclean one. And I got him for a deal too, so the downside is he is glued all together. Normally I would have his the character assembled separately from the mount. And so with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer, we're going to prime the entirety of the model. And then once that's done, we're going to take Liquitex modeling putty and then apply it all over the base. We're going to do a relatively thick layer, and then we're going to use a hair dryer to rapidly dry the top, then flatten, smooth it out, like add some texture in with like fingers or maybe a dry brush and stuff like that, and dry again with that hair dryer to rapidly dry it, and then apply more texture. And then once that's done, we're going to take the model and apply it in. However, I push it all the way in, and that caused the putty to seal around it, which caused me some trouble later. And so I forgot I was supposed to just lightly push it in continuously, and then pull it out, re-dry it with a hair dryer, and then keep pushing it in until it makes a good indent. I forgot about that. And now with Liquitex Acrylic Ink, Transparent Raw Sienna, Pallid Witch Flesh, and White Scar, we're going to, undercoat the model. I'm going to start off with Transparent Raw Sienna from the underside to get the shadows and depths. Then we're going to airbrush it from up above with Pallid Witch Flesh to add the lighting, and then we're going to dry brush the whole thing with White Scar. Now I will point out that undercoating is only useful if you're using washes, thin coats, and stuff like that, so the underside can be seen through. And since I fully don't understand what I'm doing at this point, I'm basically just laying the foundation for the future. In some cases this is unnecessary at parts of the model, and some parts it's useful. Alright, with XV88, Doombull Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint that tree in the back first. I wanted to do it because the roots are scattered around the shell and stuff, and so I figured that I should do this first because the other stuff I can paint over easily. This one might be difficult too. So we can start off with XV88 all over the wood, including the wood that's holding the Nurgling out in front. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a wash with Doombull Brown, mixing it with Lamian Medium and just a little bit of water. And I'm going to apply this all over the wood. And then once that's done, I'm going to go back with XV88 and dry brush all over the wood. However, it's still a bit too dull, like the highlights are not good enough, so I take XV88, water down a little bit, and then I basically just, with a thin brush, paint it on all the spiky edges of the wood and stuff like that. And then once that's done, I take Agrax Earthshade mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium, and then I apply this to the branches, and I do multiple coats over and over, because according to the box art, essentially the end branches are much darker than the core of the tree. And I also do this with a little bit of the wood that's near the Nurgling on there. So just like some color differentiation, it goes from bright wood to a darker wood. I then realized that the Agrax Earthshade is not cutting it, so I go with non-oil mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium and apply it to the end of the branches to darken them better, because the Agrax Earthshade wasn't dark enough to achieve the effect I wanted. Alright, with Thondia Brown, Gorthor Brown, Baneblade Brown, Dawnstone, the Fang, and Rust Gray, we're going to paint this, I don't know what it is, this snail's shell. So we're going to start off with a base layer of Thondia Brown all on the shell. And then we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Thondia and Gorthor Brown, and we're going to paint straight, hard lines. Only the deepest, darkest recesses will have the pure Thondia Brown. And then once that's done, I'm going to take pure Gorthor Brown and a dry brush, and then I'm going to dry brush covering 80 to 90% of the shell with the Gorthor Brown. Then I'm going to go with Baneblade Brown and do more lighter dry brushing with it all over the shell. And then once that is done, I'm going to take Dawnstone, water down a little bit so that it's not too striking, and then I'm going to apply this all along the, how do I describe it, the circle, the edges, the most raised part of the shell. I'm painting straight lines here because I want it to be distinct from there. And in some places you can probably add just a little bit more Dawnstone, like a second coat of it on places to make the color stronger on there. And then once that's done, we're going to take the Fang, and then we're going to apply it into the recesses. I decided to do this way because I figured I'd have a better chance of getting it right. sometimes it's easier to paint the recesses directly. And so I'm not covering all the Thondia brown. There is still some, but a layer of the Fang. And then we're going to take a little bit of rust gray in our finest brush, and we're going to try to paint straight lines in the very most center. This is actually a bit difficult. You need a good brush for it, and you're going to have to paint the same line like a few times to get the color in. And in the end, I will say that I was copying the box art for this, and it looks pretty good, but like it's not bright enough. I thought I would fix it later, but I decided, you know what, it grew on me later. But you could probably mix a little bit of white into the Dawnstone and apply it in some areas to make certain parts of the line of the shell stand out more to catch the eye. Alright, with Gene Stealer Purple, Druchii Violet, and Magos Purple, we're going to paint the mouth. And so basically we're going to apply the Gene Stealer Purple on his tongue and on the inside. Then we're going to take Druchii Violet and apply it on his tongue and inside his mouth, the mouth wall. It's a very dark and stronger color. And so this is going to get into the recess as well, but we don't want it to pull too heavily on the tongue. We mostly want it on the inside of his mouth. And then we're going to go with Magos Purple because it's a much more translucent purple, and apply it on the tongue just to add a little bit more shading onto it. We didn't want Druchii Violet to do the most of the work. Then we're going to go back with a dry brush and then dry brush Gene Stealer Purple on the tongue, being very careful to get the top of the tongue. Imagine like you're brushing your actual tongue. Alright then, moving on, we're going to use Nurgle Green, Koala Green Shade, and Lamian Medium to paint the rim of the slug's mouth and these feelers that are up top, his mustache, I don't know what these are. And so this is actually a very simple technique, but can get some good depth. So we start off with Nurgle Green, then we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of Koala and Lamian and apply it all over. Then we're going to go back with Nurgle Green and a fine brush, and we're going to paint the highlights and edges and stuff like that. And then we're going to reapply another layer of Koala Green Shade. And then we're going to go and highlight further on the most raised areas, the most prominent areas, and the most edges. Now we're going to be using straight lines. We're going to paint in lines because that's pretty strong color, very solid color to do that. And you can repeat as many times as you want to add more depth and color. I only did it just a few times in the process, and there's good depth and highlighting here just from these 3 paints. Alright, now for some interesting stuff. With Elysian Green, a Viridian Hue, Cadmium Red, and Titanium White from Winston, we're going to paint the slug. So what we're going to do is we're going to take Elysian Green, and I didn't show it, but I have Lamian Medium. It's mixed sort of 1-to-1 with Lamian Medium to make this wash. And then I'm going to apply it all over the slug. And this is going to affect as a good wash. It's going to highlight. This is really good for the undercoating and stuff, and that's going to show up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take Viridian Hue, water with mineral spirits, watered down a bit to make it a smooth paint, and we're just going to apply it as a wash, a thick, very thick wash all over the slug. And then we're going to slowly but carefully use sponges to remove it. Now, here's the thing about the sponges. You're going to have to use a sponge over an area to remove the excess, and then you're going to have to go to a clean sponge to do some more removal of the area, because like essentially the sponges also spread it. So you have to keep using clean sponges on a certain area to remove as much as you want. You use one to remove the excess, one more for more of the detail, and then another one if you want to for a very fine highlight to remove stuff. And then it creates this nice shading and stuff that's very controllable. Redactive painting, I believe. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take I can't give exact proportions because oils are kind of strange, but basically I took the red, mixed it with the white, made pink. And then I applied it on all these random areas on the head of the slug and these other spots I thought would fit, and basically added this splashes of pink. Then I took a sponge and I tap the area, and basically what it did is removed it, but it softened the color. So instead of these hard splashes of color, it then turned to soft transitions, so it kind of looks like natural blushing or stuff like that, and the slug had some more color and life to it. Alright then, with Balor Brown, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Xandri Dust, we're going to paint the slug's teeth and toenails. So we're going to start off with a layer of Balor Brown, which I also used to paint sort of the surrounding area of the ground, because I intended to use that for the color for the ground at the time. Then we're going to use Skeleton Horde Contrast and apply it all over. Pure, by the way. We want the strong color. And then basically what we're going to take a thin brush and we're going to highlight with Balor Brown all over the teeth, the most raised areas and edges, stuff like that. When you're handling it, you'll know. And as well as the toenails. The toenails don't have that distinct stuff, so I basically made my own highlights. I just painted some pretty large lines in. And then with Xandri Dust, I did a final highlight with it on the teeth and as well as the toes. And for the toes that didn't have any natural highlights, I basically painted in the middle of the Balor Brown stripes. We're doing straight lines. And now for the character himself with Plaguebearer Flesh contrast paint, Skeleton Horde contrast, Magos Purple contrast, Lamian medium, this brown color, light brown color, magenta, and dark brown burnt umber. We're going to start with painting the character. So first we're going to start with a base layer of Plaguebearer's Flesh, just pure, just getting that on. And then we're going to go with Skeleton Horde and we're going to paint his horns, the wood on a handle on his weapon, and the spine he has. And we're going to end up doing 2 coats of that in total. And then with Magos Purple we're going to apply about 2 coats in total onto his guts that are hanging out, all with a little bit of Lamian medium to help them flow better. Alright then, now moving to the oil paint part. So essentially we're going to take burnt sienna as a wash and we're going to apply it all over his body. And then we're going to take burnt sienna as a paint, not heavily diluted to be a wash, and apply it to all the wood and his horns. And then we're going to begin the long process of removing it with sponges. I cut them into smaller pieces so they can fit in areas and also to maximize the value of each sponge because they're disposable. And so I just wipe repeatedly for a long time. And eventually, I decided to use the dry brush cleaned off to also help wipe to sort of pick out the most raised areas, edges, and details of his flesh and stuff, and the brush did well. We would then take the burnt umber as a paint and then apply it directly onto the wood, as well as, just the wood. And then we would remove it with our sponges, although I didn't show the sponge removal part. We just lightly removed it with the weight of the sponge. We don't want to put that much pressure. We don't want to remove the paint, all of it that we just painted on. And then for his stomach, the ripped open part, I applied some magenta right around the rip, the hole of his stomach, and then I applied some brown around that. And then I used a sponge to tap around it. It sort of blended it in. It made it more of a softer appearance, but I had to go back and forth applying more magenta, more brown there because it didn't blend as well as I thought. It's also difficult because he's fully assembled. This is the downside of buying things pre-made. The discount is nice, but it causes you some headaches. And so eventually I kind of got it right with a combination of redactive, removing paint, applying paint, back and forth, and so it was something I had to get right there. Alright then, he looks a little bit lackluster compared to my plague bears that I've painted up in the past. I mean, he's a character, he can be uniquely distinct, but he lacks some of the color. And so with Skeleton Horde Contrast, Golem Flesh, Plague Bear's Flesh, and I didn't really end up using the other colors. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take Skeleton Horde Contrast and we're going to place that around all the open sores and stuff around the area. And then, we're going to keep doing that, finding places where his sores are ripped open. And then we're going to take Golem Flesh and then apply it within the Skeleton Horde Contrast on parts and such to make the flesh seem more darker or ruined. Then we're going to take Plague Bear's Flesh and we're going to apply it into, basically, we're going to use it to create shadow, basically. Wherever there are places where there be more shadow or stuff like that, we're going to apply this for more depth. And then the rest was just me going back and forth with more Skeleton Horde or Golem Flesh, finding places that might need some more color. This was basically me adding depth, color, browns, and all that good stuff to a Nurgle. And now with Averland Sunset, Eandon Yellow, and Eshin Grey, we're going to paint the eyes. Averland Sunset will be our base coat, and then we're going to apply pure Evander Yellow all over. And then we're going to apply dots of Eshin Grey throughout to make the pupils. And then I put the model down and then went on a Florida vacation for 8 days, so that's why this video is pretty late. Also, PSA, Spirit Airlines is doing $60 round-trip tickets to Florida as long as you only bring on a carry-on. Prices will vary based off time and demand, which would have been very good to know in hindsight because around 3 days of my trip to Florida was 90% of us all yelling at each other, criticizing each other's driving down there. So, be smart, unlike us. Alright then, first painting after vacation. With Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to paint the, the little mat thingy that he's on. I'm just following the box art. So we can start off with a layer of Mephiston Red. And then we're going to go with a layer of Evil Sun Scarlet. We're basically painting 90 to 95% of the entirety of the blanket with this. Water down a little bit so it has a bit of a more smoother transition. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of Evil Sun Scarlet and Troll Slayer Orange, and we're going to cover around a 70 to maybe 85% of the mat with this. Water down a little bit so that the transition is smoother. And then we're going to go with pure Troll Slayer Orange. We're going to cover like 25 to maybe 40% of this, just the most raised areas and edges and stuff. And it creates this nice dark to light with only 3 colors. Very simple, very easy to do. Alright, time for an experiment. With Blood Angels Red and Lamian Medium mixed 1-to-1, I apply it on the Nurgling, but it's very strong. This Blood Angels Red is very pigmented, and the Lamian Medium only helped it flow, but it was still very strong, so one coat basically covered everything, and there really wasn't that much depth in it because of how strong the color was. Should have diluted it more. Now back with Golem Flesh, Plaguebearer Flesh, and Skeleton Horde contrast paints, all of them. We're going to do this to apply some color to the Nurgling and to do all these small little details that are scattered throughout. So basically I just go through the colors and then apply them on the Nurgling to add like some sickening green or some shadow, some darkness, as well as the potted plant, the piranha plant by the way, that's on the back. I painted the head with the Blood Angels from the previous step. The Plaguebearer's Flesh was just to add like some green to his tentacles and stuff. As well as the Skeleton Horde contrast, added some wood color to that mug and stuff around there. It's just mostly just to add some quick color on these small details. You can do whatever and have fun with it. And now with Uriel Yellow and XV88, we're going to paint the Nurgling's little teeth. We're going to paint his eyes with the Uriel Yellow, and then with XV88 and the fine brush, we're going to pick out his little teeth. And that's it. And also there are some like plants on the hip of the character. You can pretty much do the same, yellow eyes and brown teeth with that. And then do a quick Eshin Gray water down a bit so that it flows over and does natural highlighting on the rocks just to get it out of the way. Now this is something I have not done in a while. It's been a while since I've actually got some Nurgle. So with Fugan Orange and Bestigor Flesh, we're going to paint all the boils that are everywhere. Or at least all the ones that I find. So with Bestigor Flesh, we're going to start off with this and we're going to apply on all these little boils. There's some you can ignore if they're too small. It's up to you, but it's on the slug and it's also on the character. And then once all the Bestigor Flesh is applied, we're going to take Fugan Orange and apply it all over all the boils we just did. And then we're going to go with Bestigor Flesh again and just place it in the center of each of these boils and stuff as a highlight. And then with Steel, Legion Drab, and Plaguebearer Flesh, we're going to apply this onto these bandages. The ones holding the Nurgling hostage and the one that the character is wearing around him as a belt. Steel Legion Drab is going to be that, and we're just going to apply some pure Plaguebearer Flesh on it. There's nothing much to it. Most of the details on the other parts of the model, and we just want these smaller things to not detract, essentially, to just blend into the background. So the focal point will be on the slug and the character. And then with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to airbrush the entirety of the model, since all non-metallics have been done. Oh, and I also re-superglued him onto the base proper and painted it up. Alright, with Iron Warriors, Iron Handsteel, Iron Breaker, and Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint up all the metal. So we're going to start with Iron Warriors all over. It's his weapon on top, the plow he's pulling, as well as the Nurgling hook, thing hooking the Nurgling, and the base of the stick that's attached to the shell. Then we're going to take Agrax Earthshade and apply it all over. Then we're going to rapidly dry it with a hair dryer just to speed things up. Then we're going to take Iron Handsteel and we're going to dry brush that all over the metal. And then we're going to take Iron Breaker and dry brush that lightly all over the metal, on the most raised areas and the most picked out edges. And now with Lamian Medium, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Golem Flesh, basically we're going to just add some color to the metal. So we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Skeleton Horde Contrast and Lamian Medium, and we're going to apply it all over the metal everywhere. Then we're going to do the same thing with Golem Flesh, but so basically Golem Flesh can also look like dried blood. And so I'm going to apply this to like the insides of his incisor, his giant pair of scissors, basically, whatever those things gardeners use, to mimic dried blood. And then with some Riser Rust, we're going to apply this in patches here and there, small little dry brush pieces all over his weapon and parts of the metal elsewhere to show rust. And then with Gloss Varnish and Blood for the Blood God, we're going to apply this to add some more character. So with the Gloss Varnish, we're going to apply this on every single boil, and the open mouth of the slug, and wherever else you think it might be good. And then with Blood for the Blood God, we're going to apply this on all the open sores, cuts, mostly on the character because he has a bunch of those, all his open sores, maybe some open sores on the slug, and wherever you think it might fit. And done. Well, sort of. I completely forgot to do the Mornfing Brown basing on the base when I set up her pictures, but whatever. And also, the fact is, the character is so yellow, the ground is yellowish, and that it really messed up with like taking the pictures, just the color contrasting, whatever, that the camera does is ridiculous. So the model looks a little bit more brighter than it should, or yellowish. But anyway, so I didn't show the basing because I've done that many times on the channel. It's basically the same thing I've done for all my army. So I'm keeping this model because it's hard to find one at such a nice discount, so I'm keeping him for myself. And overall, he's okay. Okay, so I gotta be more careful with that. So the one thing I did like is the slug. Due to the oil paints and the reductive painting, it has this really soft, sort of lifelike color to him. And so the slug is really, really well done in the color transition and stuff. None of the colors are too harsh or stuff. All his details, the minuscule pieces of his flesh are showing and stuff with very little effort. His shell is good, but like it's a little lackluster in shininess. I mean, it looks pretty good overall as a part of the package, but it blends a little bit too in. It's like you're aware of it, but your eyes skip over. There's nothing like shining back at you. Basically what I mean is maybe some lighter colors along the edges and stuff just to pick it out. More highlights, essentially. Smaller details like that. The tree just blends in the background. The character, he himself, Slimux? Yeah, Slimux. Since he's a character, it's okay for his plague bear flesh to be different, and it does look different. The oil wash has added some more depth. His skin is good, essentially. His eyes are good. I will say one thing, with the oil washes and stuff, his horns, they look really, really good compared to previous things with plague bears, because I've always had trouble with that. I couldn't really make it work. But with the oil paints, his horns look much, much better. And overall, I gotta say, I would probably give this... I feel it's like a good solid 8. I don't think it's a 9, but I can't imagine what would it need to go further beyond. I mean, the slug actually is, so the main things of this is the character and the slug. They all look incredible, but I feel like the rest slightly pulls it down because I really didn't know what to do with it. So, 8 out of 10 for me, so, well, I'm back. Alright, sorry for the delay. More to come much sooner than this. Alright, so, like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, subscribe for more, dislike if you dislike it, all that stuff. And I'll be back sooner than this video was.